Now, in recent weeks, we've seen a number of Western nations embark on a charm offensive targeted at African nations as Russia, then France, visited a number of West African countries. Seemingly not to be outdone, the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, will visit Sub-Saharan Africa, including making a stop at Pretoria, where he's expected to discuss climate change and food security, among a host of issues. Joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Haydé Adams, who is a correspondent at Voice of America. Haydé, good evening. Thanks so much for speaking to us. Now, Antony Blinken visits South Africa and a number of other African countries on the back of visits by European leaders from Russia and France in particular. What can we expect from his engagement with African countries over the next few days?
Well, first of all, this is part of a strategy, a U.S.-Africa strategy that the Biden administration is hoping to unveil pretty soon. And when Joe Biden ran for office, he promised a bold strategy towards Africa. And so they're sending their top diplomat in the form of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to sort of increase America's engagement on the African continent. And this is important for the Americans, especially following the Trump administration. You'll remember Africa was not really a top priority for former President Donald Trump. He used expletives when he described African countries. So this is important for the Americans to show that they are changing course. But it also raises the question about what the relationship is like between South Africa and the United States in particular. You'll remember when President Joe Biden, when he organized that summit of democracy, it was a virtual summit in December last year, President Cyril Ramaphosa did not attend. Back then, the tension was about vaccine inequity. It was about that U.S. travel ban imposed on South Africans. The Americans saying they wanted to contain the spread of the Omicron variant. But right now, the tension is about the war in Ukraine. And the Americans are keen to show the rest of the world that the blame for the economic and political fallout from that war should be placed squarely at the feet of the Kremlin.
Well, now, we do know that South Africa has some relations with Russia. Is this likely to be part of those conversations?
Most likely, yes. Look, there are probably going to be very awkward moments, but there are also going to be moments where the two countries will focus on what they do agree on areas of cooperation. And of course, South Africa has not taken a side in the conflict in Ukraine, as many other African countries have not either. So definitely that is an area for discussion. But Secretary Blinken is going to lead the U.S. Delegation to the U.S.-South Africa Strategic Dialogue, where they are going to discuss the things that they do agree on: healthcare, infrastructure, trade and investment, climate change, as you mentioned earlier. And look, they say diplomacy is an art and a science, so it'll be interesting to see how Secretary Blinken, how President Cyril Ramaphosa, how Minister Naledi Pandor, all those figures he will be interacting with, how they're going to navigate these various tightropes, especially ahead of the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, which the Biden administration will be hosting here in the United States in December.
Now, Haydé, we know that there is a U.S. strategy towards Sub-Saharan Africa. What do we know about that strategy and the likely conversations happening here next week?
Look, the strategy is poised to be unveiled. It has not yet been fully unveiled, but of course we're going to be seeing a flurry of diplomatic gymnastics, if you may, around this, because the United States wants to renew and revive relations, and that's a big part of what this new strategy is about. The other big part of the strategy is to counter the influence of Beijing, of Moscow on the continent. They are all competing for not just dominance, but for influence on the continent. So certainly it is part of the strategy, but I think the Americans want to connect on yet another level beyond just the political level. The Americans want to connect on the person-to-person level, the American people connecting with the South African people. And that has always been one of the hallmarks of American diplomacy, especially through USAID. But there's a saying here in the United States, from our house to your house, from our family to your family, and no doubt that is going to be a big part of America's engagement with the South Africans.
Well, what's also likely to be a part of conversations is the unannounced agenda. You know, what is likely to be talked about behind closed doors?
Well, of course, what is going to be talked about behind closed doors will probably be behind closed doors. We have no idea, but of course it's going to be, like I said earlier, a bit of a tightrope. But I want to tell you something. When African nations, including South Africa, refuse to take sides on this issue of the war in Ukraine at the United Nations, I asked one of the top advisors to Anthony Blinken recently whether America was taking note of how African nations were voting and whether those votes will play a role in how America engages the African continent, how it will impact the relationship there. And he said to me, America's not taking notes, that the United States respects the sovereignty of African nations and that they indeed respect the fact that African countries on their own have multilateral relationships. They have ties with countries all around the world. So it's going to be a diplomatic tightrope, but like I said, there's also a cultural aspect to it. It's not going to be all politics. This is a multi-pronged approach, and so it will be interesting to see indeed what comes out and whether Anthony Blinken indeed does accomplish much on this trip.
Haydé Adams, appreciate your time. Certainly look forward to speaking to you in the near future. And that was Haydé Adams, Voice of America correspondent, giving us some insight into Anthony Blinken's visit to South Africa and a number of other African countries early in